So, welcome to Study Chess with me. And if you're unfamiliar with the series, I would encourage you to check out the first or second video where you will have a more detailed introduction to the concept. But in a nutshell, I am a student of chess. I am not your teacher. I am a study buddy. We will look at tactics, positional play, endgames from works established by grandmasters that we can learn from. And like a study buddy, like a friend you might be studying with, I will share with you what I see, what I don't see, my ideas, my impressions, just like a friend of yours. I do not claim that these impressions are better than the grandmasters. Absolutely not. Trust me. But at the same time, I will be looking at everything with a critical eye. Because I believe that if you're looking at a book, then you should look at it not in a passive way, just sort of letting it go by, but you should try to ask questions while you're doing this. Okay, he says that's not possible. Why? If there's no line, then you should definitely be asking that question. One thing you will not see me doing, though, is consulting an engine, neither before nor after. I'm completely against it. It's not that I have anything against engines, because as many may know, I am definitely a technophile. So I'm very much into technology. But it's just that the purpose of this exercise is for us to learn to develop our brains. So you can't do that if you sit there trying to let the engine think for you. You really have to try to learn to come up with decisions and ideas on your own. It doesn't matter if they're wrong and the engine says, you're wrong. Because when you play a game, and that's the purpose of this, well, you're not going to have an engine to really, bail you out. So let's get started now and go straight to the tactics, which is usually how I warm up. So the first positions here are usually really easy. The session starts with one or two really easy positions, kind of just to get you warmed up. I mean, you'll see that my rating on the site, which is not my official rating at all, is 2,400 and something. And the position is a mate in one. So it knows my rating and it's still giving me a mate in one, and I didn't ask for beginner positions. It just starts that way with every session. You start with one or two or three really easy positions before it starts to give you the really hard ones. Okay, so it's a mate in one. Not spend a lot of time on it. Next position. Sorry. White to move and win. Okay. So mate threatened, so knight b5. And thank you for the bishop. Okay. Okay, so this is the first move, apparently, that is going to require us to think a little bit, potentially. I haven't looked at it. But the difficulty level is now 1838. And just as a reminder, that evaluation is not for the entire exercise, it's just for this move in the exercise. The next move could be worth 1,000, or it could be worth 2,500. It's impossible to know in advance. So white to move and win. I'm missing something? So much for 1,800 level positions. Now we're really getting to the meat of the exercise, at least for me. 2356, black to move and win, very difficult. All right, let's see what we have. All right, I think I may have the solution. I'm not really sure. This is a tough position. even if my first idea is right, I'm really not sure if the variations I calculated for the follow-up are even remotely correct. So first, let me share with you what I found, or what I think I saw. And if it's wrong, well, we can always ask the engine later why it was wrong. So my idea here is bishop takes f2. Check. Obviously, the knight is being attacked, but we can attack first. So bishop takes f2, king takes f2, bishop takes f3 first. I tried interpolating the moves, but it didn't seem to work for me. So bishop takes, queen takes h2, and here I was really unsure. I mean, the first move I looked at was basically rook h1 because it threatens to capture the queen. So it makes sense that that would be the first, aggressive move. And that's where the idea, at least for my line, comes from. Because now I will play rook takes f3 check. Obviously, pawn can't take because it's pinned. So king takes. And rook d3. Initially, believe it or not, well, you'll believe it, I hallucinated completely that white would play rook e3 because in my mind's eye, I hadn't quite gotten rid of the visual impression of the combination in front of me with the rook still on e1. And then I remembered, no, you can't do that, of course, because the rook is on h1, not e1. So that's not a problem. So rook d3 check, and the king will move, let's say, to f2. Why not? If he goes to e2, I don't think it makes a big difference, honestly. Well, anyway. Queen f2, queen g3, my apologies, with the idea of attacking the bishop on c3 and continuing the attack on the king. And that seemed to me pretty decisive to me. If there's a move that I'm not seeing right now at this depth because my visualization skills are failing me, or my imagination for the combination, so be it. But in any case, that's what I'm going to go for. And, well, let's cross our fingers. Damn. Okay, so failed at the first try. Okay. It'll be interesting to ask the engine later on what's wrong with it. I'm sure there must be something completely basic, but okay. Maybe I have to play bishop takes f3 first. Maybe the idea still works, but I'm doing it in the wrong order. It wouldn't be crazy. And obviously, if pawn takes knight, then bishop takes. I'm reluctant to give up on my idea, so I'm going to try it. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to ask for a hint. That's something I like about the site. You can ask for hints. What can I say? Somebody's perfect. Okay, time to ask for a hint. Maybe it's something completely silly that I'm overlooking. Well, wouldn't be the first time. Cover a piece. Well, the tip doesn't really help me a lot, so I'm going to go for a second hint. Pin. Pin. Well, I'm lost, but okay. I'm going to try knight d4. It's the only move that comes to mind at this level. I mean, I saw it, sure. And if bishop takes. But I was hoping to win some, not just, save the knight. And of course, there's the threat of bishop b4, not to be neglected. All right. I don't know. I'm finding that awfully anticlimactic. Really? I saw this move. I really did. I saw it almost, it was almost the first move I saw. But I just thought there has to be something, that's winning. This doesn't look winning. If it is, it's subtle. Let's ask the engine what was wrong with our previous idea. So I'm going to be clicking on engine. Now, I should warn you, when I click on engine, the engine analysis appears under the video. And I'm not sure if, I can raise the video, of course, and let you see it. I don't know how visible it will be on your screen, especially if you're on a mobile phone. Okay, let's try that, see if it works. Give me a second. Okay. All right, so in theory, I believe I've raised my video enough so that you can see the engine analysis the way I see it. I would tell it to you, but it's better this way maybe. So I'll click on engine. Take back. We want to see what the idea was, right? Engine. Now, I'm sure the engine's going to agree with them. Okay. Knight d4, bishop takes d4, and black has a 1.5 edge. Okay, what was wrong with the idea that I had, though? I'm sure it's refuted. That's not the problem. Uh-huh. Okay. Ah. Well, obviously it says that I'm completely killing myself here. That's okay. Oh, oh, I see the problem. Yeah, part of the problem here is that in my lines, there is now, if I get rid of my rooks from the back rank, I have a back rank problem with that pawn on c6. Right. That may not be the only problem, but it's a problem. All right. So just out of curiosity, just to see if I was completely hallucinating, what would happen if he played rook h1? Did I at least get that part right? I'd be very disappointed if I got nothing right. Oh, sorry. Let's go back. Yes. Rook h1. Okay. Relief. I may have missed pawn takes c6, which kind of killed the whole idea. But apparently, after rook h1, at least my calculations were spot on. Because here it says rook takes f3. Okay. King takes f3. And black is winning. It's proposing knight e5, though. That's not the line I had analyzed. Let's see what happens after rook d3. No, rook d3 was a bomb. Okay. Knight e5. Okay, let's see what happens. Bishop takes. Queen takes. And white's king is wide open and completely dead, apparently, regardless of the rook. Yeah, he has to give up the queen. Okay. So, okay, we had some ideas. They weren't all bad. It wasn't the solution, and I definitely missed some things. It's life. Let's go on to the next one. I'll move the video back down. Okay, so next position. White to move and draw. Tough. Okay, don't get a lot of drawing combinations. 2101. Well, with this many pieces on the board, the draw obviously means there must be some kind of repetition that's white can force. I mean, that's just plain logic here. So the first move seems pretty straightforward. I've spent a good amount of time working on the position. It's not that I can't see the idea. Knight c5 seems to really stand out, particularly when you know that the purpose here is to draw the position. So we're looking for opening up the position of the king and maybe forcing a perpetual or something of the like. The challenge here is not to find the first move. And just because you found the first move, you should not play it immediately. Yes, you'll be rewarded with some elo win, but in a real game, you couldn't do that without having worked out the actual solution, knowing whether you're not basically committing harakiri on the board. So I was working out all the different lines, the different possibilities, and trying to see if I could really work out every solution possible like a computer. I think I've managed, but it will be interesting to see if I'm right. So I'm going to play my move, knight c5. And the idea, of course, is after pawn takes, rook check on d1, and the king is going to go flying everywhere. He'll have king e7, queen takes, queen d6 check. I will assume king f7 because you don't want to get stuck on the back rank. You might get mated. King f7, bishop h5 check, and that's where we start to really narrow the king's position down. Knight g6 seems like really the only move. Yes, you can play other moves. King g7. But then I don't see how you escape. I'll play queen e7 check, king h6, obviously not knight f7, queen takes f6, and yeah, I don't think there's any miracle here. So yeah, looks good enough. Oh, believe on me. Okay. Am I supposed to take on b7? Well, it seems awesome. Well, I must have let something escape, so okay. One of those days. All right, I've spent way too many minutes on this, so it's time to really just go for what I've got, and if I'm wrong, well, it's it's a learning lesson. What can I say? Nobody's perfect here. This is a really difficult position because I can't see what's absolutely wrong with my queen d6 idea in the first place. So I've been trying to work out lines with bishop takes b7, and I can't see anything conclusive. This may be simply rust, my inability to calculate enough or well enough to be able to resolve the position in a mathematical way, to put it simply. So I'm going to first try a variation of my previous idea, which is simply queen takes c5. And if that's no good, then we'll try the bishop takes b7 and see what's up. Not a big surprise. After all, it says 25-6-1, so we're expecting something a little harder than queen takes c5. So okay, let's try bishop takes b7. If it's wrong and I lose a ton of rating points, so be it. But at least let's see what happens. What I saw here is basically bishop takes, and obviously if rook b8, then queen d6 picks up the rook. But yeah, all right. Okay, it seems like we're completely off base in every line here. I don't see queen. All right, well, it has to be queen c7. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. Okay. What can I say? I have no clue. It's going to take me, it's probably going to tell me it's rook d6, but all right. So let's get the hint, find out where we went wrong, and move on. Evade and attack. Maybe it's bishop h5. It does threaten mate. Oh well. Would you believe it? Oh yes, we would believe it. Yeah, and now the repetition is really easy. Okay, well, as you can see, nobody's perfect. Damn. Just out of curiosity, and I gladly admit my defeat graciously, I'm still curious to know what the refutation of my line was. I mean, where was I completely wrong and I missed an obvious defense? That's good. Okay. And let's ask the engine. Oh, sorry. It's telling me bishop h5 is the move. I forgot to play my move. So let's play it. King f7. Okay, I've seen that. Bishop h5 check. King g7. Queen e7 check. King h6. That much I had seen. Queen takes f6. Oh, knight g6, of course. Oh, my goodness gracious. I miscounted the pieces. See, in this line, I had actually thought I was going to take on h8. And even though I can still take on g6 and then h8, the rook, I'll be down a piece. Damn. Missed that. Good enough. So, okay, let's wrap up the tactical analysis. I've spent a lot of time. You'll probably see it with the labels that are going to pop up when this video is finally edited. Um, it was definitely a very instructive lesson, at least for me. I hope it was for you as well. And I hope you did better than I did. But if not, well, we take our lumps together. And I'm going to go to Ludek Pachman, and let's conclude his chapter on passed pawns. So we're now going to look at the last two games in the chapter on passed pawns in Ludek Pachman's Complete Chess Strategy, Volume 2 on pawn strategies. And the first game we're going to be looking at is Capablanca versus Zuborev from the first Moscow International. Now, the first Moscow International in 1925 was an effort by the Soviet government to promote its chess growth. They knew that their players were not yet ready to compete on the grand stage against the likes of Capablanca, Alekhine, and others. So they invited all of these players in a very richly endowed tournament in order to better prepare their players and give them an opportunity to play against, well, world-class players. Zuborev was actually a tail ender in this massive round-robin tournament. I mean, we're talking 20 rounds. Capablanca was the reigning world champion in 1925. He ranged from 21 to 27. And he came in third in this particular event with 13.5 out of 20. In second place was Emanuel Lasker, still an immensely strong player, with 14 out of 20. And in first place was Efim Bogolyubov, who was well known to be, well, a world-class player for sure, and he even eventually played against Alekhine for the title, although Alekhine tended to choose opponents that he thought he was going to beat. It needs to be pointed out. But nevertheless, Bogolyubov was, without a doubt, a streaky player who was capable of great runs of incredible strength. And this was one of those tournaments. He came ahead first with 15.5 out of 20, 1.5 points ahead of second place Emanuel Lasker, and a full 2 points ahead of Capablanca. This tournament still included players such as Richard Reti, Frank Marshall, Tartar Kauer, and a bunch of other players, even Akaba Rubinstein, although Rubinstein was really having a tough time shortly after the Second World War, as was well known. In the best Soviet player in this particular tournament was Romanovsky, who scored, I'd have to look it up, but I believe he scored 12 or 11.5 out of 20. In any case, you're not going to be seeing players such as Botvinnik, not yet. Botvinnik would be appearing in the second and third international events, which were to take place in 35 and in 1936. In fact, I own the book of the official tournament book from 1936, and it's kind of funny. The introduction was made by some kind of Soviet administrator or something, and he talks about how this was an example of how the Soviet economy was doing so much better than the rest of the world. Remember, this was in the middle of the Grand Depression. Since the second tournament had taken place 10 years after the first in 1935, and already the third was only 1 year later in 1936. An example of the superior Soviet economy compared to the decadent West. And yes, he used those words. Well, it was of the time. In any case, let's go to the tournament, and more particularly this game, and see what Pachman has to say about it. So Ludek Pachman's introduction to this particular game and its choice is the following. Here are two further games which teach us a little more about the role of the passed pawn. Now remember that Capablanca, reigning world champion, is playing Zuborev, a player I can't claim to know, but I did look up the cross table, and he came in last with 4 points out of 20. So he was clearly not the strongest of the Soviet contingent playing in the tournaments. By threatening to advance, the passed pawn can tie down enemy pieces which cannot play their part in defending another section of the board. Okay. In the following game, Capablanca used his passed pawns both to create a strong point and to limit the action of the enemy pieces, then finally brought about a decision by an attack on the king, again involving the pawn. Now, he more or less skips the first 13 moves in the game before beginning the comments. Because remember, the game is not meant to be chosen as an illustration of all of the moves and all the analysis, but rather its purpose in helping further us understand our understanding of pass pawn strategy. Okay, so I will be going fairly fast in the first moves. And remember, this is 1925 opening theory, so I'm not an expert on this line, especially not the Queen's Gambit accepted, which apparently is the case. But if this is very different from modern theory, I'm the last person to ask. Okay. Hmm. So Ludek Pachman comments here, it is clear that White's passed queen pawn is well and truly blockaded. However, he has an additional trump card, Black's weakened king side, which he gave up his bishop pair to achieve. In the further course of the game, he maneuvers his pieces in such a way that they are well placed for a possible advance of the queen pawn as well as for an attack on the king. And bishop g6, Ludek Pachman notes that taking on f3 would be a blunder because queen takes. Well, obviously, Black is going to be hard pressed here without the bishop to help protect his king side, since lines such as bishop d3 attacking h7 and queen takes h7, and I'm not even talking about the pawn on f6 here, which obviously is standing out, is going to be very difficult to prevent with a black squared bishop as well as no pieces on the king side. So, okay, it's not hard to believe. So bishop g6, bishop d3, queen d7, knight d2, rook e7, bishop takes g6. Huh. Well, h takes g6 seems kind of forced since you're going to give up the valuable e6 square, which could really cost a game. But what White achieves beyond that is not clear to me. Maybe he simply has no choice. Maybe the bishop is simply not as useful there, and the bishop on g6 is too strong, so it's better to exchange it anyway. Let's see what he has to say. If White does not exchange Black's strong defensive bishop, he has no real attacking chances. However, Black should play h takes g6, followed by king g7 with near equality. So he didn't play it. Oh. The move he chose gives him a serious weakness on e6, which White uses as an important strong point for his pieces. I'm not claiming to be a GM here, but it kind of looked obvious. I mean, the e6 square is just screaming, please don't give up on me. I mean, look at it. If you start sticking white pieces here, it's going to be a nightmare. Okay, but he did not do it. F takes g6. With the very obvious attack on f6. He's not expecting to do this, but this is just a normal move. And king g7 was played. Pachman notes that king f7 would allow the very unpleasant queen f3, obviously attacking on f6, but also threatening knight g5 check and the almighty d6 square, e6 square, sorry. Can't argue with that. So obviously, in this particular position, f5 would not be possible because of knight g5 check doing what we saw. So, okay. So king g7, queen c3. Bishop e5, queen takes c5. Bishop takes b2. Knight g5 check. Sorry, not check. Distracted, my friend. Sorry. But obviously threatening on e7. Nice. So you can't take on a1 because of e7. You can't take on g5 because of e7. And if you take on here, you will still be threatened by rook e7. So the knight is absolutely untouchable in all of these lines. Zubrev, of course, saw this. I said he came in last. That doesn't mean he's a complete beginner. Rook a e8. Knight e6 check. And Capablanca has achieved his dream square for that knight. Okay. King f7, rook a b1, bishop e5. c4, rook c8, queen b3. Now we can see that the pawn is nice and strong on d5. The question is, how does he exploit it? And here Zubrev plays what is qualified as a mistake by Pachman, bishop b8. Opening up the e-file, it should be pointed out. Was he planning for some kind of mating sequence on h2? Seems a little bit ambitious, particularly because there's really no way to reinforce it. Yes, you'll threaten mate in 1. And then what? Well, maybe he's desperate. Okay, so what was the alternative? After this move, Black soon has a hopeless position. Admittedly, it is doubtful if his game can even be held, even with the other moves. For example, if queen d6, rook e c1 is very strong. And of course, it needs to be pointed out that the rook cannot come to c7 because of the knight. So That's out. Alternatively, he can also try rook c3. Some annotators recommend instead rook c3 when white must not continue. Queen takes b7. Queen takes b7. Rook takes b7. Knight d8 check. King f8. Knight takes b7. Rook d3. Aiming to eliminate the passed pawn and all of his troubles. However, he can simply play, after rook c3, queen d1. Threatening rook takes b7. And of course, if queen takes b7, knight check. That's the idea. Okay. So instead, he blundered with bishop b8, but again, a blunder with qualifications because it's not clear he could have saved it regardless of his choice. g3, queen d6, knight f4. So this is one of those grandmaster decisions, presumably, because obviously there's nothing particularly threatening about the knight f4. So we have to assume that either white is going to be able to improve his position either by exchanging the rooks or maybe even planting it on e6 itself. And asking black's queen what she's going to do. Okay. So the answer is rook e6. Queen d7. Oh, and he exchanges. Pachman has something to say about this. He does. Rook takes e7, king takes e7, which might look astonishing at first, but Pachman is quick to point out that if rook takes e7, then the discovered check with d6 is curtains. Okay. So king takes e7, queen takes b7, bishop takes f4, and Capablanca now concludes the game with a pretty combination in which the passed pawn plays a vital role of those. So he does not take on f4, as you might have expected. Instead, he plays rook e1 check, bishop e5. Oh, this is a classic. I've seen this one before. If you want to try to find it and you're not familiar with this particular position, I encourage you to put a little pause and spend a little time on this Capablanca brilliancy. In any case, the game continues now. d6. Man, beautiful shot. And remember, this was all planned as soon as he played rook e1 check. So if king takes d6, rook d1, of course, winning the queen. If king d8, then queen b6, and you're going to get mated. King c8, rook c1, game over. So instead he plays king e6, only move. Well, one of the moves that he played, but since they're all losing, it doesn't really matter, I suppose. Queen b3 check, king f5, obviously not taking the pawn since we run back into losing the queen. Queen d3 check, king g5, queen e3 check, king f5, queen e4 check, king e6, queen c4 check, and now there's no way out of it. Rook d1 check, king e7, rook takes d7, king takes d7, queen takes a6, and Zubarov resigned. Wow. A wonderful way to enjoy a classic combination as well as promote the theme of passed pawns in the lesson. Nicely chosen, Pachman. So we're now coming to the last game in the chapter on passed pawns. Pachman notes that, as we already saw in the previous game, the pawn sacrifice on move 35 is a common feature of such positions. When the passed pawn cannot advance without being lost, it is often sacrificed at an opportune moment in order to open attacking lines. In the above game, in the previous game, the sacrifice was a simple one, as the capture of the pawn loses the queen. However, the pawn sacrifice in our next game is much more complicated. So basically what he's explaining here is that sometimes the pawn isn't going to be going to queen. Sometimes it's simply a thorn in your opponent's side that you can give up at the right moment to gain other advantages in compensation. Modern chess. So this next game is at a Trenčianski Teplice, 1949. And it's between the Hungarian grandmaster Szabo, I don't know if I got his pronunciation right, and the British player Wade. Szabo is on my radar, I've heard of him. Wade, less. And the first comment will come at move 11. Okay, so we have a Grunfeld. Knight e8. Threatening, of course, d6. He notes that we have reached the position in which the passed pawn has no particular dynamic strength. White's pieces are not well placed to support a speedy advance of the pawn, whereas black has counterplayed down the long black diagonal. So theory now recommends actually queen b6 with the idea of rook e8 and bishop f5 threatening knight e4. Remember, this is a commentary on the theory in the mid-1970s. I cannot say whether this still holds true today. He points out that knight d6 is a mistake, however, even though it looks quite natural. In the next section, we will show that it is strategically correct policy to blockade the queen's pawn by placing a knight on d6. But in this position, the immediate attempt to do so is tactically faulty. Black must now relinquish his main advantage of pressure down the long black diagonal, and his pieces become uncoordinated. So he's basically going to be giving up this long black diagonal. And we will discover why very soon. Indeed. Because white immediately plays bishop g5, forcing f6. And the reason this forces f6 is because if queen b6, then bishop e7 picks up the exchange. So f6, bishop f4, rook f7. So Capablanca, Pachman comments. Bishop f4, rook f7, knight d6. If knight d6 directly here, queen b3, rook e8, rook a d1. And though white has a more proactive position, it is by no means easy to exploit this advantage. Okay. Rook a d1. Bishop f8, a mistake. He points out here that black intends to play this bishop to d6 with the idea of exchanging white's active bishop from f4 or forcing it to retreat. However, knight d6 was absolutely essential here. And it either had to be played now or in the next move to or allow whites to obtain a decisive advantage by sacrificing his queen's pawn. So he had to play knight d6 here immediately to prevent what took place, which was d6 directly. Now, obviously, the pawn is dead. But as we will see, the pawn cannot be captured by the knight or bishop because of a subsequent queen d5 winning a piece. Okay, so just do. And it is pinned. And please note also that the rook cannot go anywhere because of the pin against the king. So knight d6, knight g7. D7, exclamation point. Well, I guess that's what a grandmaster does, because I'm impressed. It wouldn't strike me to give up the pawn that way. But of course, that's why we're here studying. So bishop takes d7. And he comments, on d6, the pawn is a clear weakness. Okay, let's go back and take a look at that. On d6, the pawn is a clear weakness. Whereas the sacrifice destroys the coordination of black's pieces. Nimzowitsch once wrote that the most dangerous pawns are those that have a death wish. Queen e4. Attacking b7. Queen c8. Bishop c4. Attacking the rook. Bishop e6. Rook fe1, exclamation point. But no comment. His next comment will actually be on move 22. So bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, knight b4. So it's worth noting that in spite of the fact that black's position or black's pieces look okay, he can't really move much. The rook is pinned, and the king can't move because the rook is pinned. If the king moves away, then the rook is left hanging. The knight can't go either here. The knight can't come to e6 to try to free up the rook and possibly the king because, well, it's being attacked. So for the moment, at least, it's a temporary advantage. Black has serious problems. My understanding of these positions is that white has to play energetically to make sure that he gets the most out of this momentary difficulty, because black will try to regroup. And if he does, then he'll be okay. h4. Threatening to advance to h5 and h6. At the very least, it's holding back g5. Okay, knight c7. Bishop takes c7. Knight takes. Knight d6. Ah. Takes. h5. Threatening h6 check, against which there is no defense, as pawn takes pawn would allow knight h4. Okay. It's certainly worse than the alternative, I'm sorry. So h5, knight e8, h6 check, rook d e6, sorry, king f8. Queen c7, b4. Yeah, and now rook the e8 is hanging because after king moves, rook takes e8. Okay. And he does note b6 would also not be possible because of queen e4. Okay. Queen c8, rook e7. Threatening rook takes f7 and king e7 and queen e7. Okay. So knight d6. Queen c3, knight f5, knight g5. The knight can't be taken because of mate. So knight d4. Yeah. The rook can't move either because of f6. And well, so knight f7, knight takes f7, knight takes e6, rook takes e6, rook e8. And in case you're wondering why he doesn't take here, looks pretty bad. And if queen takes, rook takes, picks up the queen. Rook e8, knight g5 again. Wow, that knight, man. Wow. And of course, the knight escapes scot-free because if pawn takes knight, mate, well, not mate, but yeah, no, it's mate. f7, checkmate. And rook takes, loses the queen. Spectacular game by Zambo. He played really well. And that concludes the chapter on passed pawns in Ludek Pachman's work. The next chapter for the next study session will be blockading the passed pawn. And it will be interesting to see what Pachman has reserved for us. Right now, let's go to the endgame study with Dvoretsky, since it's time to try to eliminate our Achilles heel. So now to the endgame in Dvoretsky's endgame manual, in which we reach the last two actual instructive examples in his pawn section, followed by a bunch of presumably really challenging exercises. If there's one thing that Dvoretsky is known for, It is fantastic quality information, analysis, and instruction, and mind-bogglingly difficult exercises. Now, if you notice that I changed my shirt, there's a reason for that. It's not because this is being recorded another day. It's not. This is a direct continuation practically of the earlier study. The problem is that I had to take down my 13-year-old dog for a quick walk, and I got rained on, so I had to change it. Anyway, so here we are with Yates against Tartakover. The game is listed as a draw. This is an instructive example. So there's really nothing to study here because apparently this is a blunder and an instructive one. So don't spend time trying to pause it and figure it out. And it was played in Bad Homburg, 1927. No information on that. Okay, so Black has a 1 position, and Tartakower, you know, I always pronounce his name Tartakover with a V sound. In France and in Germany, that's how they pronounce it. Not really sure how it's done in English. Decided to transpose into a pawn ending, with Black, of course, and which he thought was 1. And he played the colossal blunder to question marks. Queen takes b4. Now he points out that a takes b3 was possible. And he also notes that queen c3 was interesting. So presumably that doesn't throw away the win. With rook takes b5, if king a2, he says queen c2, okay, followed by pawn takes. Queen c3, rook takes b5 check. King c6, b takes a4, queen takes a3 is also strong. Okay. So queen takes b4, pawn takes, of course. Pawn takes b4, pawn takes b3, king b2, king c4, king a3. Now, king c3 is a stalemate. So king a3, exclamation point, b2, and king a2, the move that the great grandmaster Tartakover is very famous, missed. Of course, king takes b2 was not going to work. Since after, let's just take a look at it. King takes b2. He doesn't even list this, which is encouraging because it suggests that he's confident that the reader will immediately spot this. It doesn't need to be further drilled on the basics of opposition. Thank you. And it's, of course, a credit to everyone reading this. So new variation. This is chess base. King takes b2, king takes b4. We have the opposition. Game over. Black will win. So what he had missed was that white is not forced to take the pawn. He can play king a2. Black had missed this move when he traded off his queen. He had hoped to win the b4 pawn and seize the opposition, but miscalculated. And after king c3, king b1, king takes b4, king takes b2, the draw is obvious because now white has the opposition, not black. Yes, it was a blunder by Tartakower, but credit to Yates for spotting the move. Although, to be honest, he probably didn't have a lot of choice because once you reach that situation, everything was forced. He had only, what, 2 moves? What else could he play? If it wasn't king takes b2, king a2. It wouldn't make a difference. Okay. So this is the last instructive example in the section on pawns in Dvoretsky's Endgame manual. And it's between Yusupov and Lyuboyevich in Linares 1992. If you're and a slightly older player, the names will be familiar and even the reference to Linares as well. If you're younger, you may not recognize all of these names or even the reference. So Linares was a series of super tournaments, just as today you have some series of grand tournaments. Linares was really the elite of the elite. It was run by a Spanish organizer named Luis Rentero, and it ran for decades. It was an amazing tournament. It had multiple editions with the world champion and every best player in the world. It was really the tournament to follow. It wasn't the only one, but it was certainly considered the absolute best. Nowadays, a tournament with the top 10 players is half a dozen a year. But back then, not so often. Yusupov is a great player, and he was a finalist of the candidates tournament. The candidates matches. This was after the candidates tournaments became matches to decide quarterfinals, semifinals, and the candidates finals to determine in matches who was going to face the world champion. Yusupov is also known to have been a direct student of Dvoretsky. So it's not a big surprise to see him here, but he was a great player. So Ljubojevic, on the other hand, was a very famous Yugoslav player. He played from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s. He had a really prestigious career. He was a top player. Wasn't quite necessarily in the company of Timin at his best, Karpov or Kasparov, but practically nobody was anyway. And he was an extremely creative, energetic player. He famously tied with Kasparov, at least famous as far as I'm concerned. I think it was either a Linares tournament. If it was, I can't remember the edition, maybe 87. But really, spectacular play, really, really interesting. In any case, that's obviously not the case here since we have a very simple endgame. And here we have, 3 versus 2. Black's king is in, white's king is out. And let's see what the follow-up is. So white's rook is tied to the defense of the pawn at g3. Okay, the rook is attacking it. So, yeah. So obviously the white rook can't go anywhere since it must stay protecting the pawn. If the pawn falls, well, there's no game left. Black would have won easily, Ljubojevic in this case, if he had retreated his rook by rook a3 to prevent the white king from approaching the pawns. For example, if king e4, f5 check with an exclamation point followed by, and he points this out, king f6 wins. Okay. In fact, let's take a look at that. Firm believer in checking everything. All right, so f5, let's play it here. Just see what happens. Obviously, he has to come here because g6 is hanging. And, ooh, yeah, that's not going to work. Not for white. There's no stalemate here. White can play this pawn. Yeah. And after this, the rook is free to go wherever he wants. Yeah, there's... But let's take a look at this. See what's going on. So after check, king f4. It's as good a move as any for the moment. We know this is supposed to win anyway. King f6. And yeah, this is dead. White either has to give up his rook or give up his pawns. But there are no stalemates here, that's for sure. Okay, this looks really bad. All right, but let's suppose that he doesn't actually blunder away with the king to f4. Then what? King d4. It's the only other move. King f6. Oh, this is looking so bad. King d5. Rook e3, king d4, why not? I mean, white doesn't have a lot of options. White can just move the king around. It's up to black to convert this. Rook e4, king d3. I will assume oh, wait, there's nothing to assume. Oh, wait, let's go back. d4, rook e4, king d3. Does this work? I don't. My first instinct, honestly, is just to try to exchange off the f pawn. Let's assume that I could play this just as an example. Now, obviously, the rook is hanging, but let's just work with this for the theory. If this happens, it's game over. So how can I reach that position? Can I force that position is a good question. So here I played rook e3, but maybe that was a mistake. Maybe what I really needed to do was shake off the king immediately. Like this. The king is cut off. Now, okay, maybe even king d5 is not forced, but let's just see what happens. King c4. He can't stay on the d file anymore. Rook f3, king here, and f4. Looks pretty good. Okay. It's not that I'm doubting him at all. It's just that we need to learn how to figure these things out on our own. It's easy for him to say, oh, after this it wins. That's great if you're a grandmaster, or in his case, well, even though Dvoretsky officially only reached the title of IM, or International Master, at his peak, he was 2,540 at a time when 2,540, which already today is easily of grandmaster strength, back then would have placed him practically in the top 100 players in the world. So he was no lightweight. A grandmaster title would have been easy peasy. I recall him saying that he was actually more interested in becoming a trainer, which is why he didn't really push this too far. But there's a seriously elite caliber player behind all of these lessons. So, like I said, I want to be able to look at these positions and not just be able to say, I know it's winning. I want to know how to win it. Okay, looks pretty good. I think the idea is that. I think the idea is to really be able to push f4. At first, I thought maybe playing rook g4, but I don't think that really has a lot of future. Maybe it works, but it just seems not as efficient. Okay. So, all right. Oh. He actually says rook a3, followed by king f6, g7, f6, or f5. Gotcha. So rook a3 was the proper plan without king e4, and then just play king here, and then move the pawn and get rid of the rook and start moving your majority. Okay. Back to the example. Rook f5. This, apparently, is a mistake. King e4. Rook takes g5, h takes g5. White has the opposition, but Dubojevich had counted on it. f6, g takes, king takes, king f4, g5 check. And now king f3 with an exclamation point. And it became clear that the opposition on the f-file would give black nothing. He played king f7, but king f5 is simply met by g4, exclamation point, h takes, king g3 with a draw. The king is forced to back off. There's really no option. You lose the pawn, and yeah, simple draw. So king f7, he tried to get the distant opposition. King f2, king e6, king e2, king d6, king d2, king c5, king e3. Don't want to get too far away from that pawn. Okay. And now, if I read the list properly, we're going to be getting into the exercises. I hope you're feeling good. I hope I'm feeling good. Okay. So this is the first actual exercise, and it was composed by Carlo Savioli in 1887, no less. I'm not sure how to feel about that. If I can't solve it, it means I can't do much better in after 150 years or so. Well, close enough. In any case, Dvoretsky tells us we have to solve it, and it's black to move. And yes, white is going up, black is coming down. All right, so start the motors. I will probably be editing out the very long think that I'm going to be putting in here. I would recommend that you put it on pause as well and see if you can solve it as well. And once I'm done, we'll go on to the next entry in the Dvoretsky's chess-based list, which is the actual solution. There's no solution here in this particular example, so I have no more clue than you as to what the continuation is. So I'm going to have to throw in the towel. I'm kind of stumped. I've analyzed this position quite a bit, and I haven't been able to reach a solid conclusion, although the only thing one thing I can at least say is really clear is that black is the one who has to try to save this game, not win it. As to how that happens, I haven't been able to reach a solid solution for that. So yeah. Now to see the solution. Ah, apparently I missed something completely obvious. Oh, I didn't look deep enough. Ah, okay, so I was on the right path. I just apparently completely misjudged the consequences of it. So are you ready for the solution? Position hasn't changed, but now I have the solution in front of me. B4, C4, and he agrees. King A5 is losing. No surprise there. B3, this loses, and he gives the line King B3, here, King down, there, King B5, King B7, A3, gaining the tempo. Needed, King C7, King A6, and we go around. King A4, and we've seen that before in one of his exercises. So it needs to be said that we've actually seen these positions in the previous examples. So if anything, Dvoretsky's method of showing us examples that are going to be relevant are certainly to the point. C5, A7, and we saw that one. Okay, so C4, B3, I saw that. A3, and he agrees with me, at least that much. B4, B5, of course, is a draw. That much I saw. But King A5, King takes B3, King A6, and I didn't look much deeper than this. Next time, learn to go forward. I guess that was the problem. I should have realized that since some lines were clearly losing or not going to succeed, that I had to just push deeper, and I didn't. And in a real game, you wouldn't have any choice because that's all there is anyway. Okay, lesson learned. At least in terms of practical decisions. King A6, King B4, King A7, exclamation point, King B5, King B7. And here he points out that here, white only has one spare tempo, while in the line with King A5, he had two. I honestly didn't think this was going to be a decisive factor. A4, and I just thought that here, getting the opposition, and I should have remembered it, but okay. I did say this was my Achilles heel. King A4, King C7, not King A7. We saw that one. I remember this. King C7, King A6, King C6, King A7, King C7, King A8, King C8. Right. Okay. Okay. I spent a ridiculous amount of time on this position, beating my head against the wall. Oh my goodness. Okay. So look, I realize that at least for you, if you've been just following the video and going through with it and maybe paused less time than I spent analyzing it, this may seem like a shorter video than planned. I actually haven't seen the total time yet, but I'm going to cut it short. I've spent at least 2 hours in all studying here with the tactics time, the analysis, the pondering and whatever, and that's good for me. I hope you've enjoyed this study session with me. Thank you for joining me. And the next time we will pursue more of these exercises. Oh, there are more exercises for us to beat our head against. We'll also be looking at more mind-boggling tactics, and we'll be looking at the blockaded pawns from Ludek Pachman's next chapter. Thank you once again. Happy chess and good mates.